everybody, really quickly before we get into today's stories, I wanted to let you guys know that on Monday, the 28th at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, I will be going live and recording the final Halloween Stories episode next week for Tuesday. I'm going to record them on Monday night for Tuesday's actual episode. But during that live stream, I'm going to be giving away a Halloween Booze and Booze bundle. So one lucky person will get a hoodie, a t-shirt, a poster, every single one of my stickers that I've made thus far, all shipped directly to you for free. The only catch is you have to be there. You have to be in the live stream, in the chat, giving me your name so I can put it on this wheel that I will then spin live. And whoever the lucky winner is, I will reach out to you directly or have you reach out to me directly after or during the stream, and we'll get your information and I will send all of this stuff to you for free just because it's Halloween, it's spooky season. Why not? But yeah, I will also post this in the community chat to remind people who don't hear this. But yeah, that's it. That's all. Let's get into the stories. I still think about that night. I don't know why, and after all these years, it keeps coming back. The memory sticks, like a sliver that you can't pry out, buried deep. 5 years I worked dispatch, 5 long, grinding years of voices in my ears, and the blur of anxiety, the muffled edges of panic. Most of the calls were pretty mundane. Drunks out of control, neighbors bickering, the usual noise that makes up the tapestry of the suburban life. But this call, it was different. I didn't realize how different it would be until I was about halfway into it, listening to the sound of desperation claw its way through my headset. It started out like any other, static at first, then a few garbled words, too faint to make out. I remember leaning forward, adjusting the volume, thinking maybe somebody's phone had cut out mid-dial. I could hear movement though, footsteps, shuffling, and something else. Breathing maybe? I opened up my mouth to speak, but the voice on the other end beat me to it. Please, please, my kids. The words slipped through in fragments, like they'd been torn apart. The voice was male, strained and hoarse, but that wasn't what made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was the fear. Whoever this guy was, he wasn't just scared, he was begging. I leaned into the microphone, suddenly more awake than I'd been all night. This is 911, what's your emergency? I kept my tone level controlled. Can you repeat that? I didn't catch all of it. A pause, then some more noise, scuffling, a faint curse, and then somebody else yelling in the background. The man came back, his voice was trembling now, barely even above a whisper.
Please, just don't hurt them. Don't hurt my kids.
My heart skipped a beat. There was something raw in the way he said it. The words coming out in stuttering bursts, like he was choking on them. I could hear more shouting in the background now, louder, more aggressive. A second voice, angrier, barking out orders. Who was ever with him was in control and they weren't messing around. I tried to speak, but the line went quiet. No response, just heavy, suffocating silence. For a split second, I thought the call had dropped again, but then the yelling came back, clear this time. I could hear 2 distinct voices now. One belonged to the man, the other, a cold, grating rasp.
Shut up. Shut up or I'll...
The rest of the threat was lost in this burst of static. I leaned back in my chair, adrenaline surging through my veins as I scrambled to triangulate the location. My screen flickered, loading slowly, way too slowly. Sir, I need you to stay on the line, I said, not even knowing if anybody could hear me. Help is on the way. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure where I was sending them yet. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, willing the system to give me something, anything. Then finally the address pinged, a neighborhood on the edge of town, a place I'd never even heard of. I keyed the mic for dispatch. This is dispatch to Unit 324 and 532. We got a situation unfolding somewhere near 48 Maplewood Drive. Possible home invasion, at least 2 suspects, children involved. Approach with caution. The line crackled as the officers acknowledged the call, speaking back mostly in a series of codes. I could feel the weight of it already settling in. I cut back to the original call now. The man on the other end was crying, whispering broken words between deep, shuddering breaths. He was pleading for the lives of his children as someone was rifling through everything that poor guy owned. I could hear everything happening inside that house. I could hear the way the man gasped out for air. I could hear the shuffling of feet as somebody moved closer to him. A heavy thud like a fist connecting with flesh. My mind raced, painting a picture that I didn't want to see.
They're gonna kill me.
He whispered.
Please.
His voice broke and trailed off into another sob. I swallowed hard, but I was out of moves. I wanted to reach through the phone and grab him, to pull him and his kids out of there, but all I could do was sit there and listen. The officers were getting close now. I could hear them on the radio closing in, their voices crackling through. But I stayed on the line with the man. I wasn't about to leave him alone in whatever nightmare he was currently living. Again, he probably didn't even know I was there, but I wanted to provide this guy with whatever shreds of hope that I could. Suddenly, there was this loud crash on the other end of the line. More shouting, this time accompanied by the distant sound of something breaking. Glass, maybe? I pressed the headset tighter to my ear, straining to make out any of the words. The voice that came next was not the man's. It was one of the suspects. It was straight venomous.
Where's the safe, you piece of shit?
Another crash. The man screamed, but it was cut off quickly, like somebody had clamped a hand over his mouth. I could feel the bile rising up in my throat as I forced myself just to stay calm and forced myself to keep listening. They're asking about a safe, I relayed to one of the officers through the radio. Be prepared for anything, potentially armed. Then came a noise that sent chills racing down my spine. The sound of children crying, high-pitched, terrified sobs that cut through everything else. The man's voice followed, desperate and pleading.
Take the money, take whatever you want. Just please, please leave my kids out of this.
The line went quiet again, but this time, I could hear the faintest sounds of footsteps. I didn't know where they were going, and I didn't know if the man had been knocked out or if something even worse had now happened. I was afraid to ask, afraid to speak up. My mind then flashed to my own family, my little niece with her eyes wide when she got scared of something in the dark. What if this was her? What if this was her dad, pleading for her life? The tire screamed as I hit the corner. My partner's hand gripped the dashboard, his eyes scanning the houses ahead. We had no clue what to expect. We were close now. Dispatch had given us the approximate location, but I still wasn't sure what we were walking into. Home invasions can get ugly fast, and this one sounded like it was going south really quickly. 48 Maplewood, I muttered, my eyes flicking to the house numbers as we passed them. My gut was tight, a knot of nerves coiled up and ready to snap. The neighborhood seemed quiet at first glance, the kind of place where nothing bad was ever supposed to happen, but as we got closer, I saw the crowd, a group of people huddled up on the sidewalk, their faces strained in the dim light. There, my partner said, pointing to a house near the end of the block. The front door was ajar. I could see shadows moving inside. The air around the place just felt wrong, heavy, stiff, like it was suffocating everything in its path. It's weird when you roll up on something wrong, because everything will be an indicator. It's hard to explain, but my fellow first responders will know exactly what I'm talking about. Things just feel off. I grabbed the radio. Dispatch, we're on scene at 48 Maplewood. Looks like a home invasion in progress. Multiple suspects, possibly armed. The crowd parted as we stepped out of the cruiser. Their eyes were wide with fear and expectation. Somebody in the back shouted something about the kids, said they'd seen 2 kids inside, that the father was trying to protect them. This went from crisis to teetering on shitting my pants. It was a delicate yet dangerous situation. No room to do anything other than to remain calm. "Are they armed?" my partner asked out of sheer habit. "Oh, they're definitely armed," somebody from the crowd said. "How do you know?" "These assholes are always flashing a gun. They got into it with Ernie last night and now they're fucking robbing him," the guy explained. "Does Ernie own this house?" I asked. "Yes, sir." "All right, thank you for the info. Get back and stay out here," I assured him. "Let's go," I said, drawing my weapon and turning back to the house. My partner followed close behind, his own gun drawn as we approached. Inside, I could hear the muffled sounds of a struggle, voices raised, something crashing to the floor. We moved quickly, clearing the rooms as we entered them. The place was a mess, furniture overturned, broken glass scattered across the floor. But the noise was coming from the hallway, and that's what drew my attention. I could hear them now, 2 voices, one calm, the other panicked.
"Where's that damn safe?"
Another crash, then the sounds of footsteps, somebody running. I turned the corner just in time to see 2 kids scrambling through a window at the far end of the hall. I barely had any time to register what was happening before the kids were out of my sight. My heart skipped a beat as I sprinted towards the window. The light outside was dim, but I could see them, 2 small figures bolting across the yard, disappearing into the darkness. First instinct was to go after them to make sure they were safe, but I couldn't, not yet, not with the suspects still inside. My partner gestured toward the bedroom at the end of the hall. "There, they got the father." The voices were much clearer now, and I could hear one of the suspects threatening the father once more, asking about a safe. Every muscle in my body tensed. I didn't know how much longer this could go on before the situation exploded into violence. I keyed my mic. "Dispatch, kids just escaped through the window. We're moving in on the suspects now. Be ready for a medical team." I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins, the tension coiling tighter and tighter as I motioned for my partner to follow. We inched our way down the hall, carefully, guns raised. The door to the room was partially open. I could hear the father's strained breathing, the sound of something heavy scraping across the floor.
"Just tell us where this is, and it ends easy,"
came the cold, calculated voice of one of the intruders. My pulse was pounding in my ears now. Everything slowed as we positioned ourselves, my mind racing with the scenarios, worst-case outcomes flashing immediately before my eyes. Would they shoot the father before we even got in there? Was there more than one weapon? I wasn't about to gamble with somebody's life, but the clock was ticking, and I knew we couldn't wait any longer. With a nod to my partner, I kicked the door open, the scene unfolding in a blur. 2 men in ski masks, one standing over the father, the other ransacking the closet. The father was on the ground, blood running down the side of his face. His eyes widened in terror as we burst in, and for a split second, nobody moved. "Police! On the ground! Everything on the ground! Guns down! Hands on your head, asshole! Do what I'm asking or I'll fucking waste you!" Things get tense when somebody points a gun at you, and like in this situation, my instructions became a little colorful. It felt like a lifetime, but in that split second, everybody froze. The suspect closest to the father jerked back, startled, but instead of dropping his weapon, he raised it, a pistol. I didn't think, I acted. The sound of gunfire erupted, my finger pulling the trigger before I even had a chance to take another breath. That asshole pulled his trigger too, and the way everybody else in the room tells it, the official word is he shot first, but not at me. He shot the victim in the upper chest area, at which point I fired. My adrenaline seems to have blanked my memory. I don't remember him firing, but either way, both targets were hit, and suddenly there was blood everywhere. The suspect dropped, clutching his chest. His body hit the floor. His partner, momentarily stunned, made a break for the window, diving headfirst through the glass. I heard the crash, saw the shards of glass spray into the air, but by the time I reached the window, the second suspect had disappeared into the night. "Dispatch, shots fired, suspect down, one fleeing on foot," I breathed into the radio. "Victim has also been shot. We need medical now." I spun back to the father, who was struggling to sit up. His hands were shaking, his breaths came in wet, but his eyes were locked onto mine, wide with disbelief about this whole situation. I holstered my weapon, knelt down beside him, the rush of adrenaline starting to fade into something else. Relief, maybe, or exhaustion. Either way, I hoped he was going to pull through. "Don't move. Ambulance is on its way," I said, though I could tell he was checked out, totally in shock. "My kids. Where are my kids?" he asked. "I helped them get out." "They're safe," I told him, trying to calm him down, even though I wasn't entirely sure where they'd gone to. "We will get them. You're okay now." He sagged back in relief, his head falling limp. "Thank God." I could barely breathe. My heart was hammering so hard in my chest, I thought it might explode all over the keyboard. I listened to the officer's voice crackle through the radio, heard him say shots fired, and my mind started to spiral. I felt helpless, stuck inside this chair, miles away from the scene, unable to do anything but just listen. The man's voice who'd called was gone now. Maybe he was hurt, maybe worse. I clenched my fist, trying to keep myself together. This job definitely had its moments, but this was a nightmare unfolding in real time. The father, the one who I suspect called me, was shot first because he couldn't help the suspects with the safe. I could hear everything through the line. It was like being one step ahead of the officers there. I could hear the officers moving throughout the house, their radios buzzing with frantic updates. A suspect was down, another one on the run. I swallowed hard, imagining the chaos playing out on the other end. The father, bleeding and terrified. The kids out there in the dark somewhere, lost or hiding, scared out of their minds. And I was here, listening, just hoping that the worst hadn't already happened. "Unit 324, I said. "Are the kids accounted for?" A pause, static. The officer's voice came back gruff but steady.
No sign of them yet. They jumped out a window before we made entry. We'll search the yard."
I closed my eyes for a second, forcing down this panic that was rising up in my throat. This had to end well. It had to. Another few minutes passed, and each one was dragging on like an eternity. Then, finally, a different voice came over the radio. A second unit arriving to the scene.
"We got the kids,"
the officer said.
"Both safe, shaken up, but no injuries."
Relief washed over me like a wave. I could almost feel the weight lifting off my chest. My shoulders sagged a little bit. My body collapsed back into the chair. And for the first time in what felt like hours, I exhaled. "They're safe," I muttered to myself, not even believing it. "They're safe."
"The dad didn't make it. Sorry, man."
Came next in the line. Sounded like the guy was on the verge of tears.
"He died before the EMTs could work on him."
I was stunned. The guy I'd been running these plays for, the guy that dialed me to begin with, the gunshots that I heard had been his execution. I felt sick for his kiddos, but at least they were alive. There was a victory in that. The father was dead, but the kids were unharmed, and one of the suspects was down. I should have felt okay, should have felt relieved that it hadn't gone worse, but all I could feel was the lingering terror. The way the man's voice had trembled when he begged for his children's lives. The way the kids had screamed in the background. The sound of that gunshot ringing through my headset. I knew I would never forget it. I'd go home at night, lie awake in bed and hear it over and over again. And then the next night, and the night after that. That was the thing about this job. You don't get to turn it off. Those voices stay with you. The fear stays with you. No matter how many calls you take, no matter how many people you help, there will always be one you can't shake. And this was mine. There's something about working the graveyard shift as a dispatcher that just sticks with you. I've been at this job for years now, and I can tell you it's not for the faint of heart. It's not the crime or the accidents that get to you. Not really. It's, at least for me, the quiet. The long stretches of silence where you just sit alone, waiting for the phone to ring, knowing that when it does, it's going to bring chaos with it. You don't know what kind of chaos either, but you learn to expect it. I've heard it all. Wrecks caused by DUIs, bar fights spilling out into the streets. The kind of things that people like to think don't happen in small towns like ours, but they definitely do. And what makes it worse in a town this size is I usually know who's on the other end of the line. A former teacher of mine maybe, calling because her husband won't stop screaming at her. Or an old classmate who got hauled in for drunk and disorderly conduct at the local pub. There's always a face behind the voice. And that's what makes it tough sometimes. But the hardest part, I think, is not the loud, frantic calls. It's the calm ones. The ones where you know something terrible is happening, but the person on the other end has not realized it yet. Or worse, they have and just don't care. And that's the part that sticks with me, the apathy. Because sometimes the worst calls are just the ones where nothing seems wrong at first. Where there's no urgency, no panic, just quiet, unfeeling indifference. I remember the worst call that I ever got like it happened yesterday. It was a Thursday night, nothing unusual, just a regular shift. I was working alone. The other dispatcher was on their lunch break, and the night cop on duty was busy checking in on the holding cells. It was around 2:30 in the morning when the phone rang. That's usually when things slow down. The bars are closed, most of the drunks are either passed out or locked up for the night. So when I saw the number flash across my screen, it didn't set any of my alarms off at first. It was an elderly couple's number. I knew the address. Pretty nice neighborhood. The kind of place where nothing ever happens. I picked up on the first ring, ready to handle whatever came next. 911, what's your emergency? There's silence on the other end. Not static, dead air. I glanced at the screen, confirming the number once more. I could feel the familiar prickle of unease. Calls like this, where somebody dials and doesn't say anything, they happen more often than you think. Most of the time it's nothing, just a pocket dial, somebody messing around, but at 2:30 in the morning, it felt off to me. Hello? I said again. This is 911. Do you need assistance? There was another pause, then a voice so soft that I almost missed it.
I'm not sure if I should be calling 911 or not.
The voice was unmistakably elderly, a woman speaking with the kind of slowness that comes with age. There was no urgency, no fear, just kind of an absent-mindedness. Well, I said, that depends on the nature of your call. What's going on? There was another long silence, then finally she spoke again.
I think my neighbor's house is on fire.
I straightened up in my chair, fingers already hovering over the keys to punch in the address for the fire department. You think it's on fire? I asked. Ma'am, can you clarify for me? Do you see any flames?
No,
she said slowly.
I don't see any flames, but I smell smoke, and it's been strong. I've been smelling it for a little while now.
Where are you calling from?
My home.
She answered.
Across the street from them. They got a nice house, blue shutters. You know the one.
I did. I pulled up the street on my screen as we spoke. A family lived there, 2 kids if I remember right. The parents weren't much older than me. I felt a small sense of relief. This was probably nothing. Somebody left a stove on, or maybe they were burning some late night firewood. Still, I could not ignore a call like this. Have you tried knocking on their door, letting them know you smell smoke? There was another long pause before she answered me, her voice remaining unnervingly calm.
No,
She said.
I didn't.
I frowned, my fingers tapping lightly against the keyboard. You should go knock on their door, ma'am. It's late, but if there is a fire, you need to alert them.
I don't think that's necessary,
She said. And there was something unsettling in the way that she said it, almost like she was annoyed at my suggestion. The police can handle that. My heart sank a little. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but there was something about her tone that was just not sitting right with me. Ma'am, it's your duty as a neighbor, no, as a human being, to try and warn them if their house is indeed on fire. Another long pause. I could hear the soft rustle of fabric on her end, like she was shifting in her seat. Then finally she spoke again.
All right.
She said, almost with a sigh.
I'll take a look out the window.
I waited as she shuffled around, her footsteps faint but distinct. I could picture her now, moving slowly through her house, pulling back the curtains to peer out into the night.
Oh,
She said suddenly, her voice brightening.
there it is, yeah. I can see it now. The flames are coming from the living room window.
I felt this cold jolt run down my spine. She said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather. I'll get the fire department over there immediately, I said, my voice tighter than I intended it to be. In the meantime, you need to call your neighbor.
I'm not gonna do that.
She interrupted, her tone almost turning smug.
It's late. They're probably asleep.
Exactly, I snapped, frustration creeping into my voice, which is why you need to wake them up. There are children in that house. There was a soft hum on the other end, like she was considering it. Then she responded.
I don't want to bother them. It's not my responsibility.
I stared at the screen in disbelief, my hand now gripping the phone even tighter. Ma'am, if you don't warn them, they could die. Do you understand that? More silence. Then quietly she said,
I understand.
Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the feeling that this woman, this neighbor, was not all there. Maybe she was senile. Maybe she had dementia. Either way, she was detached from reality in a way that was downright chilling to me. I sent out the call for the fire department, rattling off the address and details as quickly as I could. I couldn't get this woman's eerie calm out of my head, though. When I returned to the line, she was still there, still watching.
The fire's getting bigger now,
She said, almost cheerfully.
It's really spreading.
Ma'am, have you called your neighbors yet? I asked with my voice tight.
No,
She replied.
I told you. That's not my job.
I was about to argue again when I heard the sirens in the distance. Relief washed over me. The fire department would be there soon, and hopefully get that family out in time. I stayed on the line with the woman, listening as she described the flames growing higher, the fire licking the roof of the house.
It's really something.
She murmured.
Almost like a bonfire.
The trucks pulled up to the scene moments later, and I could hear the shouts of the firefighters through her end of the call as they rushed to contain the blaze. I closed my eyes, praying they'd be able to get the kids out in time. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the fire chief's voice crackled through one of the radios.
Dispatch, this is Engine 1. We got a structure fire at this address. 3 victims found inside. No survivors.
My stomach dropped. Are you sure? I asked.
Yeah,
Chief replied grimly.
2 kids and 1 teenager. Looks like they died from smoke inhalation before the fire even reached them. The cause of fire appears to be a stray ember from the fireplace.
I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The parents had gone out for the night, leaving their teenage son in charge. He and his 2 younger sisters had been asleep when the fire started. It never stood a chance. I switched back to the woman's line. "Ma'am," I said, my voice hollow. "The firefighters, they found children. They didn't make it." There was a long pause again once more on the other end, then almost too quietly to hear. She responded,
I told you, it wasn't my responsibility.
and with that she hung up. This call stayed with me from moment to moment for about a year. I really struggled to accept any part of it. But as time went on and I went through the motions of grief, I found myself letting parts of it go. Of course, other hard calls had come in. A person's emotional limit is really only so much. People don't have room for that much horror and heartache, so we pack in what we can and just let the rest wash over us. It's the only way I stay sane doing a job like this. And a tremendous amount of whiskey. I've been a dispatcher for a nationwide roadside assistance company for about 5 years now. You wouldn't think a job like that could mess with your head, but it does. The sounds of distress start clinging to you after a while. People call you when they lost their keys or their car has been broken down in the middle of nowhere. You have to calm them down, make them feel like everything's going to be okay. But there are some calls, ones that you can't shake. Calls where the terror bleeds through the line and the helplessness settles into your bones. When I first started, I thought, it's just cars, what's the worst things that could happen? But it's not just about the cars. And sometimes the danger isn't from their vehicle, it's from the people who find them out there alone. My team told me the whole history of horror stories. One guy called in from along the California-Arizona border, and while on the line, he got split in half by a big rig. And get this, he was still on the line. Another story was about a lady in Compton who needed somebody to come and change her tire. Somebody rolled up on her with a car and a shotgun, blasted her nephew right in front of her. It was a gang hit. One dispatcher had once sent a driver out to a scene to recover a vehicle. Found nothing out there but a burnt out sedan with a corpse in the driver's seat. The perp had called in his own crime. It's a crazy world out there on the American roadways. Terrence was one of our regular drivers out in Detroit. Big guy, built like a linebacker, but with the easy, reassuring demeanor of a guy who's seen it all and does not scare easily. We'd worked together for years, though always remotely. Dispatchers don't meet the drivers face to face very often, if at all. But over the years, you get to know their voices, their patterns, and their moods. Terrence was a talker, always quick with a joke or a story about some bizarre roadside encounter that he'd had that day. He had this way of making things sound lighter, less serious, even when they were. Terrence was also divorced, so he was always talking shop about beautiful women. The world needed more women. People didn't appreciate women enough. It made him so easy to talk to, I can't even lie. That dude was funny, personable, and always had something clever up his sleeve. It was easily one of my favorite peoples to talk to inside my day-to-day. I got used to hearing his voice, knowing that no matter how weird or rough a situation got, Terrence could handle it. One time, I accidentally sent him to a house party where a drunk dude needed a tow for a car that was running. The guy was so hammered he couldn't turn the key in the ignition. When Terrence tuned him into this, the guy instantly wanted to scrap with him, squared up and everything. Another time, I sent him to a location that was in the middle of an active bank robbery. He still got the car. That's why, when he called into dispatch that afternoon, I could tell something was off before he even said anything to me. It was around mid-afternoon. I was running through the usual calls, sending drivers out to help people with flat tires or dead batteries. The shift had been pretty routine so far, nothing too out of the ordinary. I was just finishing up a call when Terrence's number popped up on my screen. I picked up the phone, half expecting one of his usual stories, but there was something in the way he said, "Hey man," that just made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "I got a weird one today," he said, his voice a little more tense than usual. I heard the rumble of his truck engine in the background, the familiar hum that came through every time we talked while he was on the road. But underneath that, there was something else, a nervous energy that I was not used to hearing from him. I have some drivers, and I won't even sugarcoat it. They're little bitches, whiny, complaining, can't get shit done in a toilet setting, if you know what I mean. Terrence was not like that at all. He was a real one. "What's going on?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. I was notoriously fat when I worked the phone, so leaning back was a gamble every time. He started telling me about a guy that he towed earlier that day. "It was just one of those situations where you know something's off right away," he said. "The dude was angry from the moment I got there, pacing around like this caged animal. He kept ranting and raving about how the tow was going to cost too much, how he'd been ripped off before. I told him the price, and if he didn't want the service, I'd leave, no problem. Then he started making threats." I felt a flicker of unease, but I tried to play it off. People get mad at us all the time. When you work in customer service, especially roadside service, you learn how to deal with angry people. I mean, I get it, not everybody is prepared to pay a big random roadside bill. Threats?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Like what? What'd he say?" "Nothing too specific at first," Terrence said. "Just the usual. You'll regret it, or you don't know who you're messing with, that kind of thing. I stayed calm and told him to pay or I'd be on my way. Eventually he did cough up the money, but as I was leaving he said something about getting even with me. Said I better watch my back." "Sounds like another one of those empty threats," I said. "You get people like that all the time, right?" "Yeah," Terrence said, but his laugh was short, almost forced. "This guy, I don't know, man. Something about him just didn't sit right with me. I see crazy folks all the time, but this guy was way off." We talked for a few more minutes, mostly about nothing, just the usual back and forth. Terrence had a really good way of easing the tension, even when things were off, so by the time we hung up, I'd almost convinced myself he was overreacting. The rest of the day passed in a blur of calls, and I kept an ear out for Terrence. I sent him a few more jobs and we checked in once or twice, but every time we talked, I could hear that same tension still in his voice. It was like he was holding something back, like there was something he wasn't saying or telling me. I imagined him driving around the suburbs, big, obvious truck, looking over his shoulder at every turn. Maybe somebody was out to get him. It wasn't until my shift was nearly over that I heard from him once more. I was doing the closeouts with each service provider, getting totals and then stamping out the receipts. I cycled through like a dozen different dudes before calling Terrence. He usually saved him for last so we could bullshit for a bit. The line rang a few times, which told me he might be eating, needed to use a napkin to touch his phone. This guy was a one-ring type of dude unless he was asleep or eating. "Talk to me," he said. "He lives," I responded. "What's going on, brother?" We talked a little bit about the events of the day. He made some good money. I pulled a decent commission. We both had good lunches, and some of the calls that I sent him, well, let's just say the customers were the best kind. And by that I mean stunning women beyond happy to have a tow man on site. As we talked, I started telling him about some of the random office drama and the crazy calls that I'd gotten that day. He gave me the totals here and there. It kept us moving and also kept us out of trouble if anybody decided to listen to this recorded call. So anyways, as I'm talking, I hear Terrence clear his throat, which indicates something is up. What's up, man?" I divert the discussion. "Nothing. This same car has driven by me like 4 times now." It's starting to get suspicious. Weird. Where you at? I'm on a job, but finishing up, he said. I'm in the parking lot off 7 Mile, and this car, shit, it just pulled in behind me. Silence for a moment. Shit. It's that asshole from this morning, Terrence said. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Terrence, get out of there now, man. I can't, he said. He's already out of the car coming toward me. Just gonna talk him down like earlier. What the hell? No way, man. I started, but I could tell he already set the phone down. I could hear the sound of his truck door unlocking as he hit the button. His breathing had picked up now, and I could tell he was trying to keep himself calm, but there was an edge of panic in his voice. Next, I heard the door swing open and Terrence casually saying hello. There was no response. Just stay in the truck, man, I said. Don't open the door for anything or anyone. Couldn't fathom what he was thinking. There was another long pause and I could hear footsteps, quick and deliberate, slapping on the asphalt as the guy approached. Then there was a sharp bang, the sound of the truck door being smashed closed, then open again.
What the hell?
Terrence's voice shot through the phone, louder now, filled with panic. I heard the other guy say something, but his voice was low and muffled, and I couldn't make out any of the words. Then I heard him say,
I'll kill you.
Get out of the... I started. But the line was cut off by a deafening crack. A gunshot that seemed to echo through the phone, leaving my ears ringing. Terrence! I yelled into the phone, my heart slamming into my chest. Terrence, are you okay? For a moment, there was nothing but silence on the other end, and then a low groan, followed by the sound of Terrence gasping for air. I shouted, gripping the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white.
Yeah, give me that blood money, bitch.
I heard a guy sneer through the static. I imagined him taking the cash out of the bag on Terrence's lap.
I told you I'd get you.
And there was nothing. I could hear him struggling to breathe, his words barely audible through the pain.
He shot me, man.
I felt a surge of nausea. The room started to spin around me as the reality of what was happening hit me like a freight train. Oh shit. Terrence, hold on. I'm calling the cops right now, okay? Just hang on. My fingers fumbled over the keypad as I tried to Google the number for the downtown precinct in Detroit. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely even hit the right keys. I found it, got the number and dialed. When the operator finally picked up, I was talking so fast, I had to repeat myself 2 or 3 times before they could even understand me. I told them I worked as a nationwide dispatcher. One of my drivers had been shot in a parking lot off 7 Mile in the interstate. Surprisingly, they had an idea of where I was talking about. Please, hurry. You have to send help, I begged. He's been shot. He's still out there. Please send somebody now. They assured me that officers were on the way, but it didn't feel fast enough. Every second that ticked by felt like an eternity, and all I could think about was Terrence bleeding out in the parking lot, while I sat here, helpless on the end of the phone. I switched back to Terrence's call, praying he was still alive. Terrence, I called out, my voice barely steady. You still there? There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought I lost him, but then, faintly I heard him.
I'm still here,
he whispered. His voice was so weak I had to strain to even hear it.
It hurts. God, it hurts so bad.
I blinked back tears. You're gonna be okay, I said. Just hold on a little longer, okay? The cops are coming. You gotta hold on.
What do you think I'm doing, man?
He chuckled. His breathing was labored.
It's bad, though. Real bad.
Don't say that, I said. You're strong, man. You got people waiting for you. Just hold on a little longer, please. Another long silence, and then finally, the faint sounds of the sirens in the distance. My heart lifted a little bit, but the fear did not leave me. Not yet. I heard footsteps again, heavier this time, voices, authoritative, commanding. The police officers had arrived. I stayed on the line listening, hoping and praying they'd find him in time. I heard them shouting and calling out for him, and then nothing. The call disconnected, leaving me in the deafening silence of the dispatch center. I don't really know exactly what happened after that. They wouldn't tell me much. All I know is that my friend Terrence did not make it. The paramedics got to him, but it was far too late. That bullet had hit something vital, and by the time they got him to the hospital, he was gone. I didn't know what to do with myself after that. I kept hearing his voice, his last words, echoing inside my head. I blame myself for not doing more, for not getting help to him sooner. It's been months now, but I still think about him every day. Sometimes I dream about that lonely stretch of road, about the man who killed him. In those dreams, I'm there with him, and I can't do anything but watch as that gun is raised, as that shot rang out, and as the light fades from my friend's eyes, blood pouring out of his wounds. Lock your doors out there, even if it's just in your car.